it's Jessica. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite authors on Kindle Unlimited, Annette Marie. She's the first author that I read something from and was like,
oh, this is really good. I really like her, and I want to keep following her and reading more of what she does.
within my adult life, this is the first author I've gone around specifically waiting for new books to come out. Another reason Annette Marie resonates with me as an author is because what she's doing in her writing and what I'm doing in my writing is very similar. We both write urban fantasy, new adult, female-forward stories. Now, Annette Marie writes a lot faster than I do. She has so many more books in her catalog, which is great for me as a reader to enjoy. She also writes in a lot more traditional romance and steamy scenes than I do. And I think because of that, there's a lot I enjoy as far as the reader part of me goes, and there's a lot for me to learn on the writing side, the marketing side. As far as independent authors go, Annette Marie is actually pretty popular. She has almost 5,000 followers on Goodreads, which in the grand scheme, compared to like a mainstream author, might not sound like a lot. But as far as these independent authors go that I follow and look out for, it's actually a pretty high number. The first series I ever read from Annette Marie is going to be the Red Winter Trilogy. What drew me to this was its cover art, which you can see right here to the side, and it's just really pretty cover art. When I read the summary, it has an urban fantasy vibe set in Japan, and to be totally fair, I don't know if the Japanese culture that's used is actually representative of Japan, or if it's something that Annette Marie just sort of borrowed. What she's done is so reminiscent of anime and manga culture. I know it's a little bit different because those are usually Japanese writers writing about their own culture, which they can portray any way they like, where Annette Marie, I don't believe, has any heritage that she can pull from in this avenue. But there are just so many similar stories and similar depictions. The same way I like a manga like this, I really liked a larger book. The other thing I liked about Red Winter is a lot of elements of it reminded me specifically of Inuyasha, and I loved that as a teen. This is a lot older version of Inuyasha. There's more complexities going on. They're not going back to feudal Japan. They stay in modern Japan. And I think the main character, Emi, is a lot more likable than Kagome is. And I also think that the kitsune that Emi interacts with is a lot more interesting and compelling than Inuyasha is. They also throw in a crow yokai. He's awesome, and he actually has a spin-off series that you have to subscribe to Annette Marie's newsletter to get. In this book, there are drawings. For me, didn't work so much, but I think for Annette Marie's key audience, and for a lot of people who just like a couple visuals here and there in their novels, they're gonna really enjoy this. I've read it both as 3 separate books, and I've read it as the whole book together. When I went and did a beach weekend, I downloaded Annette Marie's Red Winter Trilogy all in one, and that was great because I used the Kindle Unlimited service for many books, so instead of having to download 3 to get the whole experience, I only had to download the 1. It's one of those series that I can go back to over and over again because there's just a lot of fun fantasy elements, and my mind pictures all these colorful scenes and sees all these interesting areas to explore and just dives right into that world. It's the kind of world that I just really enjoy seeing and getting lost in. So overall, Red Winter was my first experience with Annette Marie, and it's still to this day my favorite of her books. I think it's really underrated. There's about 7,000 ratings on Goodreads for it, and that sounds like a lot, but her other books just eclipse this rating-wise. So I just think that of all of her stories, this one doesn't get the kind of recognition or credit that it's worth. And a couple selling statistics on Red Winter, just the first book here on Amazon. It is number 173 in the teen and young adult myths and legends category. It's 186 on the Asian myth and legend ebooks, and it's 199 in fairy tales on the Kindle store. So she does pretty well sales wise. I think she really knows what categories to target and zone in on, and that helps her with her sales. And definitely if you're an author or an aspiring author doing some research in the different Amazon categories and figuring out which ones are smaller and more niche that would fit your idea are going to help with that. So the next series I read by Annette Marie is going to be the Steel and Stone series, and I mentioned that in my top 5 kick-ass female protagonists video over here. This series I think is what really took off Annette Marie's career. In all of her blurbs and her bios, both in her own biography on her Facebook page, on her Amazon page, and here on Goodreads, she is always mentioning that she's the author of the Steel and Stone series first, even though she's moved on from this Steel and Stone world into another Guild Codex world. And I do mention in my reviews the first 2 or 3 books are really good, and I think 4 is where you start to see a turn and it starts to go downhill quality-wise a little bit. I just feel like the story started to get too wild, too out of hand. It was like she had meant to stop the series sooner than she actually did. We see more and more outrageous things happening in the story, and a couple of conflicts, personal conflicts happening between the main girl and her boyfriend that just don't make a lot of sense to me. Or like it's a retreading of an old conflict that the two of them had already sort of gotten through together. It's just presented in a slightly different way, and we experience the exact same conflict, the exact same emotional plot points that we did before. And one thing I will say is that while Annette Marie sort of milked this Steel and Stone series a little bit, in my opinion, she does very well in future series keeping the books smaller so that we go through the same conflict and emotional beats with characters just once. The other thing that I like about future Annette Marie books that I think she was learning to do here in Steel and Stone, she will take a smaller personal conflict and it will bloom out and integrate into the world. Here, the smaller personal conflict and then the larger conflict don't entirely mesh, and they don't feel as good or as organic as they do in other stories. So even though I love this one and it has a very close place in my heart because I find the main character here to be a lot like my main character in my own book, except she is a little younger, I don't know that I love all the plot beats or that this series was planned out from the start. It feels a little seat of the pants. Still, Steel and Stone has about 12,000 different ratings on it on Goodreads, and it has a 4.17 star review. So you really can't go wrong with this book. And as I've said before, Annette Marie is an independent author. If you look at her details, it will say that her publisher is Dark Owl Fantasy Inc. But if you go to the Dark Owl Fantasy Inc. website, it becomes clear that this is her own personal publishing company. It's not a larger corporation that publishes anything besides Annette Marie, which is why I feel confident saying that she's an independently published author, even though she technically has a publishing company. In the Steel and Stone series, the first book is number 81 in teen and young adult werewolf and shifter fiction, which is interesting because there is no werewolves in this story, or really even shifters. The creatures that she talks about are actually fae, and there's like high fae, which are like associated with lightness, and low fae, which are associated with darkness, and neither one really has an ethical alignment associated with it, even though humans tend to think one way or the other about them. And the shifting part comes in because in their home realm they look one way, and when they cross over to the human realm they get more human characteristics, but they're capable of transforming back into their more original other form. I wouldn't classify this as shifter fiction at all, to be honest, even though it's number 81, because to me, shifter fiction, like with werewolves, it's about having that inner beast and that pack mentality and something distinctly non-human that connects to the natural world. Or like if you do a dragon shifter story or other animal, even a fantasy animal story, they have these not human, more primal instincts usually. But here, the demons or the lower fae and the angelic / upper fae, they still have very human drives and instincts even in their alternative forms. And while their alternative forms sometimes give them extra powers, it's not something that changes their mentality or mindset, which to me is core of the shifter genre. So I actually think this is a misrepresentation of what the book is about to be in werewolf and shifter fiction, but it might just be me, because apparently it's number 81 in that category. It's number 119 in teen and young adult werewolf and shifter ebooks, and it's number 146 in teen and young adult sword and sorcery fantasy ebooks. And I think the sword and sorcery fantasy ebooks is also an interesting place to have it because this is an urban fantasy story. There's definitely sword fighting and that traditional magic associated with these books as well, but there's also modern weapons in warfare too. And when I think sword and sorcery, I'm really thinking like that medieval, olden times kind of vibe. If you are incorporating electronics, modern weapons, all that kind of stuff in there, then I don't necessarily necessarily think you've got the spirit of sword and sorcery. Although I will say some of that fun action piece that you expect in a sword and sorcery definitely exists in this series. I don't know if I'm doing a great job selling you guys this series since I'm debating the categories they're in on Amazon. I'm just mentioning that from my personal experience with the book and what I think of with these categories. They're definitely earned a spot to be high ranking, and they're definitely excellent books. And I would definitely recommend them. I just don't know that I would pitch them to anyone as shifter stories or as sword and sorcery stories. Maybe this is something for me to think about in my own marketing strategy going forward, that what I think is the right category versus what is actually the correct category or category that it would sell to. I've been self-limiting. So obviously after the high of the Steel and Stone series, I wanted more from this world. So I went over to Spellweaver, which is actually a prequel series to the Sword and Steel series. I didn't like Spellweaver at all. I'm not gonna lie. I started it off with 2 stars. I think the highest rating I ever gave to anything in the Spellweaver series is 3 stars. I don't think the main protagonist here, Cleo or Chloe, works. She likes to play very innocent and naive, or she's a character that we're trying to make very innocent and naive, in a situation where I don't think innocence and naivety work very well for the story. Also, they took a character favorite that I love from the Steel and Stone series, that I wanted to know more about, that I wanted to learn and grow with, and who I wanted like to have a happy ending and a girlfriend and all this other good stuff with. And they gave him Chloe, and I just don't, or Cleo, I don't even know how to pronounce her name. And she's just like not a good match for him, I don't really think. And I don't think their adventure or the task that they had at hand was well suited for their power set. I just feel like the whole overall story and the characters don't fit together and wasn't well thought out. It's like,
hey, I wanted to continue in this universe. I just blew up off of this. Here's a continuation as a prequel.
It just doesn't recapture the magic from the original one. And the other thing this story does, I think, is it works too hard to pull in characters from the previous one. Like Cleo or Chloe, however you want to say her name, she ends up interacting with the protagonist from the next story, from the Steel and Stone saga. And it's not an interaction that's satisfying or helpful. It's kind of like annoying. And they also have like a limited interaction with the love interest from the last series. Him being in the story actually takes away from Lear's ability to work and do things. Also, Lear is so competent and so helpful in the Steel and Stone series, and in this series it feels like he's always just floundering. I know it's a younger version of him and he's like less capable and finding his footing and whatnot, but it's not coming together. That said, I am one of the only people who didn't love this story. It has an average of 4.15 stars on Goodreads. It doesn't rank as high in Amazon sales wise though, so I don't think I'm the only one who wasn't interested in this premise. There was a point in time where I was reading the story, I think it was around book 3, and I thought like,
I don't like this. This isn't a good time. I should just stop.
and I was like,
no, you need to get the whole series. There were a couple books you didn't like in Steel and Stone too, and it ended up working itself out. Maybe this is just a slow roll up and you're gonna start to like this the further in you go.
It's not how it worked out. This is number 532 in contemporary fantasy fiction, 817 in new adult and college fantasy, and 1185 in action and adventure fantasy. I'll also note that these are different categories than the Steel and Stone series were. I think contemporary fantasy makes sense, new adult and college fiction makes sense, and action adventure fantasy makes sense. I would have loved to see a side-by-side comparison on how Steel and Stone does in those categories versus the Spellweaver, because I think it applies to both series far better than the categories given to Steel and Stone in the first place. And this could be an evolution of how Annette Marie decided to label her stories going forward. And maybe during the transition, Spellweaver just didn't get the kind of recognition that it should have. After all, its star rating is pretty good. And then the last series by Annette Marie that I've read is the Guild Codex Demonized. And this is a series that I've mentioned both in the Gods and Demons book, and I've mentioned it in my 2020 wrap-up of books too. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was so good. Annette Marie is like back to her regular form here. It's a very interesting mishmash of some of the things that she executed very well in Red Winter and some of the stuff she did in the Steel and Stone series. It's like she sort of found a happy middle between this sort of innocent, good-natured girl who's sort of discovering things along the way, like we would have found in the Red Winter series, and this jaded, kick-butt, aggressive female character, push forward, prove yourself, jump into the action that we're getting in Steel and Stone. And I think it's a very happy middle ground. I think the interaction between the main female girl and the demon work really well together. Her friendship with her cousin is very interesting. The sort of situation she's thrust upon into her because her parents' death and her uncle's nefarious deeds is compelling. She has like a fun baking quirk that makes sense and plays out through the entirety of the novel. And her own personal journey is tied in with the larger world in a way that makes sense and is interesting, and a way that I believe that this personal journey, this like,
what am I gonna do about my situation,
blossoms into,
no, actually, it's not just me in this situation. This affects the whole world, and I have stakes to play in a larger game. I could help in different ways, or I could prevent different outcomes.
all of that is really interesting and satisfying in this story. It's believable, it's woven all together very well. It's worth mentioning that the Guild Codex series is a world that Annette Marie made, and each one of the different ones, like this is Guild Codex Demonized, plays into a different aspect of it. So actually there's another Guild Codex series about a bartender with magic, and they have like a limited crossover going on here in this book. And I haven't actually read her series because it doesn't appeal to me. And they have another Guild Codex series out right now as well, which I'm considering whether or not I want to read. But overall, like, the covers on all these are great, and the protagonists are a lot of fun, the stories are good, and I think the world she builds are excellent. Even in Spellweaver, where I wasn't in love with the world and some of the things that were cool about Steel and Stone, it felt like got undone. But the overall world building and the high fae realm, the low fae realm, how they interact with the human realm, how humans became known to them, all of that works and is really interesting. You know, she has these really unique and fun concepts. They add a lot of flair. So those are the things that I admire about Annette Marie's writing. Those are some of the series that I've read from her and interacted with her on, and some of the other places that I've mentioned her on the channel. And I'm sure I'm going to continue mentioning her because there's just so much that she does that's really great, and I plan to keep reading her in the future, so I'll be adding to the list as time goes on. I hope you check Annette Marie out and maybe consider reading something from her, maybe one of these series that interests you or one of the other Guild Codex series. And you know, other than that, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like. Give me a comment down below whether or not you've ever read Annette Marie, whether or not you would want to read her in the future, and what other kinds of authors maybe that are like her that I should check out. Other than that, I do content twice a week, and if you're looking to be alerted to when that comes out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope everyone has a great day and just keep on reading. Talk to you later. Bye!